what exactly is slavery? How does it begin? How does one begin to become a slave? And I think that's a important question. I think those are important questions that are often overlooked. All we see is, hey, this person's a slave. My mind goes into the question, well, why are they a slave and how did they become a slave? And again, I'm not trying to trigger anybody. These are just honest, genuine questions that I believe there are logical answers for. Because I want to establish that I don't believe anybody just wants to be a slave. And I'm sure we can all agree on that. Like, nobody just wants to just be enslaved to another country or another man or anything like that. Like, no one just wants to be a slave per se. You know what I mean? So that's what makes me ask the question, well, how did they become a slave? Because knowing that the average person, most people wouldn't just volunteer themselves to be a slave. So I would have to ask, okay, so what happened? How did this group of people become slaves? Because again, no one just most people don't just sign up for that. You know what I mean? So we are in 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 1. And it reads, "Now the wife of a son of the prophets cried to Elisha, 'Your servant, my husband, is dead. And you know that your servant feared the Lord. But the creditor has come to take my 2 sons to be his slaves.'" I want to repeat that last part just now. But the creditor, that's the key word, the creditor, has come to take my 2 sons to be his slaves. So the fact that she says the creditor is coming, to me that indicates that if there's a creditor, meaning, the person supplying something, a creditor is someone that's supplying credit, supplying a service, a good, and a good could be money, food, whatever. But with her saying that there is a creditor coming, to me that implies that they were given something and they just weren't able to pay it back. Like she said, her husband passed away. He probably was the one that was in the position or doing the work and the labor to pay it back, but then he passed away, her husband passed away. So now, that's usually how it would happen oftentimes. If you weren't being taken over, if it wasn't a physical takeover like a war, the only other main way a slave was created was through transactions and not paying them back, which is exactly what sounds like is going on here. They had a creditor had given them something, supplied them with something, or of whatever. It doesn't say what, but creditor supplied them with something. Her husband passed away. What it seems like her husband passed away before he was able to pay it back. Now the creditor's coming to collect, and usually that's how the slave was created. If you can't pay it back, someone in that household has to kind of, you know what I mean, be the payback and pay it back through labor or whatever that creditor would ask them to do or have them to do. That's how the slave was created. The creditor gave them something or provided something for them, and they were expected to pay it back or to work it off. And if they didn't, then that kind of got passed on to someone else in their household. So the 2, perhaps 3 ways that a person becomes a slave. 1 is by force. Usually it's if a country or a group of people invade another country or group of people and they take over that land and they don't kill the people, they spare them, but they make them a slave. So they have to, usually like offer some kind of monetary or labor or service or something, goods and services. They have to send that to the group of people or country or whoever that has taken them over by force. So that's one way. It's usually is by force. The other way, which is what this verse is talking about, 2 Kings chapter 4 verse 1, the other way, which is these, in my opinion, these are the two core ways that people become slaves: by force, and number two, by debt. It's debt. Slavery has a lot to do with debt. If a country's not taking them over by force, they're taking them over by indebtedness, debt, meaning this person or these group of people or this nation was not able to pay their debt to another person or to another group of people or to another nation or group of nations. So now these people are now indebted to this other group of people, making them a slave. And that's what this verse is clearly saying. The creditor was coming to take her sons because they didn't pay their debt. So that's a very key and core way how slaves are created. It's connected to a lot of slaves or a lot of forms of slavery, just debt, not being able to pay something that you owe. It still kind of goes on here in America in a different way though. Like, for example, like your credit scores. If you don't pay your credit cards and your bills and your this and that, your credit goes down, and it kind of makes you in a form like a slave, like, because you're trying to pay back this debt, and you're not able to buy certain things or get certain things if you can't pay back your debt. So that's pretty much it. And I know I said 3-ish. The third way is voluntary, because even in the Bible it tells you that there was like every 7 years, which is interesting because our credit system, like every 7 years or so, debts that you haven't paid or whatever, it's supposed to get forgiven. Like here in America, like in our system, it's supposed to be forgiven every 7 years, I believe, and removed from your credit. Now it's funny because that started in the Bible, in the Old Testament times. That's from the first 5 books of Moses, where in the 7th year, all debts are supposed to be forgiven, and slaves were supposed to be released. And the exception to that is if the slave chose, it was their choice, to remain a slave. So that's why I said 3. The 3 ways, according to my studies, the 3 main ways that I have found that slaves are created: 1, by force; 2, by debt; 3, which is not the most common, but I just why it's a soft 3, hard 2, soft 3, is voluntary. Because even in the Old Testament, it was commanded that, you're supposed to release your slaves after a period of time, which I believe is 7 years. They also had the year of Jubilee, which was every 50 years, I believe. And in that year, you also were supposed to free your slaves and release all debts. It was like every 7 years and every 50 years. You were supposed to release everything. That's generally what it was. And the exception to it is if the person desired to remain a slave, which they had the choice to do, but it was the slave's choice if they wanted to remain a slave. And then if they chose to remain a slave, according to the word, they were to remain a slave like forever. Like that was the seal. Like, okay, you're making this choice to be this person's slave, and that's it. I think they put like like an earring or some kind of piercing on them, and that was to seal that deal. Like they chose to be and to remain a slave, because how it was worded is like perhaps they were getting good treatment and their master was good to them. So some people, and you see it even to this day, like some people don't mind it. I know I've met people that don't mind being incarcerated, don't mind being in jail. You know, for them it's guaranteed shelter, it's guaranteed food 3 times a day. It's guaranteed. Like they don't have to figure out what they're gonna do, where they're gonna eat, where they're gonna go. Everything's guaranteed. I'm talking about, I know people that have said this to me. So, you know, some people choose to do it. But those are the 3 ways, the 3 main ways that I have come across that a slave is made. Again, my opinion. Some of you may know more, know better. That's fine. But from what I've seen, debt is one of the biggest drives of slavery. And even when it's taken over by force, I would say that's a spiritual debt, because anytime the Lord allowed Israel to be taken over, it was because they weren't paying their, spiritual debts. They weren't being obedient, which I would say is a form of debt. Like, they had an obligation to be obedient to the laws that were given to them. And when they weren't, it created like a spiritual debt. And they didn't pay it by returning back to the Lord, returning back to the Father, getting rid of all the pagan stuff they were doing and all the foreign gods they were worshiping and all that stuff. They didn't get rid of it, so God called the tab. And in that way, him calling the tab was allowing another nation to come and put them into bondage, slavery. So to me, I would still say that debt is probably the highest form of slavery, or how a slave is created, is debt. Whether it's a physical debt like monetary goods and services, or a spiritual debt like disobedience. And usually it wasn't just like, okay, they did one thing wrong. Usually it was like habitual, perpetual, repeated disobedience that led to the Lord being like, you know what, all right, you guys don't want to serve me and do right by me, then hey, I'll let you get taken over. I'll put you in a position where you're gonna have nowhere else to turn but to me. And that's, again, this is how I've been seeing it. This is the primary way that I see debt is created. That I see slavery is created. It's through debt. A lot of it is debt-based. Even with the transatlantic and all the other different historic moments of slavery, I believe if they weren't being physically taken over, which that, to my understanding, I could be wrong, but the whole slave trade was not 100% about nations just being taken over by force. Many of that was debt. These people were in debt to people, and they were selling the debt. And the debt just so happened to be people. You know what I mean? That's what slavery is. Slavery is people being the form of the currency, which in this day and age still pretty much exists. It still exists. It's transformed in some ways, but it still exists. And it's something that I feel like probably will exist until the end of Earth. Not saying I necessarily agree with it or anything like that, and I'm not trying to justify it. I'm just looking at it for what it is. Slavery, in my opinion, is a debt-based system. It's about debt. Sometimes it is forced too, but oftentimes enough, I believe it's debt. And it's just what it is. And again, I can go on, and I'm probably going to make more and more videos on this, but I just wanted to just get this out. yeah, I appreciate your time. Peace.